to Gino Kenny.
Minister, earlier this year the Health Research Board published a very extensive report in regards to the efficacy and safety of the Medical Cannabis Access Programme, and the programme has been up since 2019. Can you give me your thoughts in relation to the report and what the Department of Health intend to do next?
Thank the Deputy for his question and just acknowledge his ongoing work in this area, both in terms of the MCAP programme initially and the evolution of that. As the Deputy is aware, we launched the Medicinal Cannabis Access Programme in 2021 for the treatment of 3 conditions initially, so refractory epilepsy, spasticity as a result of MS, and nausea from chemotherapy. Since the inception of the programme, there have been 55 separate patients have availed of it, 52 adults, 3 minors, mainly for spasticity associated with epilepsy, 38. And then, as the Deputy quite rightly says, we have conducted a review now that we have the programme in place to see, is there a case, is there a clinical case for the programme to be expanded? It's certainly something that I'm very open to. So at my request, the Health Research Board was requested to carry out an exercise of initial evidence gathering, and the results of which have been published. So the publication, Deputy, now is subject to clinical review. We want to ascertain whether there is sufficient evidence to broaden the scope of the conditions that could be treated under MCAP. I'm certainly very open to it. I'll be led entirely by the clinicians on it. As you'll be aware, I allocated significant funding to get the MCAP programme moving. In a second positive note, since we launched MCAP, there have now been a number of licensed. The MCAP programme obviously is for the unlicensed medicinal cannabis products. We now have several licensed cannabis products. What I'm hearing back from the clinical community is the clinicians, their preference where possible is to prescribe on the licensed programme, because they would argue that there is greater clinical evidence and trials, etc., around that, and so we're seeing prescriptions under the licensed programme increase, which is very positive.
Yeah, Minister, the concept of the Medical Cannabis Access Programme is a good idea, as in because the system of a licensed system is very bureaucratic, and I would say archaic in some instance. So since the inception of the MCAP, only 55 people have got access. Now that's a tiny amount of people in terms where, you know, the legislation was introduced in 2019 and then the access programme in 2021. So it's a tiny amount of people. Now the report, the HRB report, says there's significant evidence in terms of neuropathic pain, where there's good efficacy in terms of medical cannabis. So I would suggest that the programme has to expand, otherwise it will become redundant, Minister. And where it will become redundant, people will either go to the black market or go without. And there is certain huge amount of frustration in terms of the kind of limitations of the programme thus far.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. I accept your position. It is a smaller number of people. We know from the clinicians that in many cases they are nervous about prescribing, even though the MCAP programme is in place for the unlicensed products. And as I said to you, we'll do a clinical review now of the HRB findings, and I'm very open to expanding it. We'll be led by the clinical view on this. What is interesting, though, is whilst I take your point that 55 patients, it is a low number. We're seeing a much higher number now under the licensed cannabis medicine. So, for example, as you'll be aware, Deputy, Epidiolex is one of them for seizures associated with Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and others. And we now have over 144 patients on that have been prescribed. So the clinical community would appear to be more engaged with the licensed products.
In regards to the licensed products, but obviously the MCAP was set up in terms of those that have, tried every medication that is known to their condition, and they want to be in a position where they could try a number of these medications. And there's I think about 9 listed medical cannabis products that are listed. So that's better than it was maybe 18 months ago. But there's enormous frustration in terms of the restriction and the limitability of the MCAP, in terms of it can only can be prescribed by a consultant, which is a very limited amount of medical professionals that are in this field, and the limitations of the 3 conditions. Because, as I said, Minister, if it doesn't expand, I really don't see where the programme will go. If you look at the Danish Medical Cannabis Access Programme, it has a number of conditions, particularly neuropathic pain, where the evidence is really, really good in terms of medical cannabis, in terms of that condition.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. I take your point. I think that's all very fair. We have now a pathway to address exactly those issues, and I'll ask my officials to bear all of that in mind. They'll be taking note of our interaction this morning in the unit who deal with this. I take your point. The first question is, do we expand from the 3 conditions? And I'm very open to that. And then I think secondly, what we need to do is engage with the clinical community as well and say, even if we do expand, are there other ways? Are you still nervous of prescribing under MCAP versus licensed, and is there anything we can do there? So potentially expand the conditions and understand if there are other barriers or concerns that clinicians have, and very open to a clinical recommendation back as well, saying, do we expand beyond consultants? So I'll certainly be led by the clinical advice coming back. I'm very open to all of the points that you've made.